5 Greenpeace protesters have been arrested for getting on top of Rishi Sunak's house. Basically, I don't know if you've seen it, they've draped all of this kind of black fabric material. If I can bring it up, I'll show it to you on the screen in case you haven't seen it yet. They've got all of this kind of fabric. They're putting it all over his house. They're saying it's in protest about these things like the new oil and gas licences. They reckon it was all right to do it because he's on holiday with his family and all the rest of it. I think it's pretty damn disgraceful, quite frankly. And I do not know who these lot actually think that they are. I think they've crossed a line when it comes to what is acceptable and what is not in protest. But, David, where do you stand on it?
Yeah, I mean, people like this doing these kinds of protests have crossed one line after another over the last couple of years. And we had the 2 men who scaled the Queen Elizabeth Bridge in Dartford. That was terribly, destructive to traffic. I mean, it stopped traffic going for like 24, 36 hours. I mean, that was really bad. This is another line that they've crossed going to private property. I'm not sure how they got in. I mean, it doesn't seem like there's any security there, which is very surprising. But you should not go to people's private homes and do this kind of thing in their own, property.
What do you think, Michael?
I can see why it's controversial. I mean, I think it would be out of order if there were 2 conditions which were met. So, one, if there were people there. So, obviously, you don't want to scare someone's kids, however much you disagree with their policies. And 2, if that house, the address of it wasn't already public knowledge. Now, everyone already knows what Rishi Sunak's house looks like because there was the controversy over his £250,000 swimming pool. And I think it's not a coincidence that these protests always skirt on the bounds of acceptability. The reason they do these actions whereby some people will disagree and some people will agree with the motives or the means, the tactics, is that means on shows like this we have a debate about it, and then on shows like this we also get to talk about the outrage.
But do you think it's all right that they've gone to his house and done this?
I think because they knew he was away, it's OK. And because we already knew Rishi Sunak's address. As I say, I think if there were any risk that there would be kids in the house, it would be unacceptable. I think if there was any risk that would be doxing them, so revealing his address, that would be unacceptable. But neither of those conditions are met.
Yeah, but hang on a second, because, yeah, it's public knowledge that Rishi and his family are in California or wherever it is on their holiday. But these people, they don't know. Family members, Rishi could have said to his, I don't know, whoever it is, guess what, the house is going to be empty the next week. Why don't you guys go and stay there, chill out, enjoy the grounds, the gardens? They don't know whether or not anyone is in that property. So that excuse doesn't wash with me. And even if there was not anybody in that house, I just think, who on God's green earth do you think that you are, that you can go to somebody's home, private home, just because you disagree actually with their professional policies? That's his job. So in his job, he's done something that you disagree with. So taking that to his house, I think is disgraceful. And I'm struggling to understand why you're kind of saying it's all right because you think no one was in.
Well, they also said, so in the interview you just showed, which I hadn't seen beforehand, the co-director of Greenpeace had said, we knocked on the door, we spoke to the staff. They clearly knew that no one was... So there was people in then? Yeah, but they told the staff what was going on. So
then there was people in.
But there's no suggestion that anyone was scared by that, because also that was their work. The staff, that's their workplace, right? And I think we probably all accept that it's OK to take direct action.
But so now that you know that someone was in, because you said a minute ago, if there was no one in, then it was all right. But now that you know that there was someone in, because you just said you've seen it for the first time there, so now you know that there was someone in, does that change your view?
No, because they're at their workplace.
All right, but if they're in... But so as long as someone... Right, so you think it's OK to go to someone's house as long as there's nobody in, but there can be someone in as long as they're working there?
Yeah, I think it's OK to go to someone's workplace when they're working there. That's why we often see people drop banners from the Houses of Parliament. Here, I do think it's more controversial to protest at someone's house, but if they're not in and everyone already knows the address, I think it's relatively acceptable. Also, what I would say is Rishi Sunak is doing something very controversial, which is opening up new oil and gas. Now, the UN General Secretary, the International Energy Agency, they have all said this is extremism. This is incredibly radical. This is incredibly unhelpful to do, especially in this period of time where we're having the hottest summer on record. Climate change is happening right now. So I do see why campaigners or organisations such as Greenpeace thinks it is worth taking actions which they know will be controversial because what they're protesting against is so extreme. It's also worth, I think, really emphasising that this is not some marginal view that these people at Greenpeace have. What they are doing is bringing to the attention of the British public what the UN General Secretary is saying, what the International Energy Agency is saying. And I think it is really important that everyone in Britain is aware that the leaders of these international organisations are completely outraged by Rishi Sunak's decision to open new oil and gas when we're currently in, as I say, the hottest summer on record.
It's not their business, though, is it? What Rishi Sunak decides to do is domestic energy policy. That has got nothing to do, or
well,
very
it will affect everyone, because climate change does affect everyone.
Yeah, but the heads of the UN sit there turning around saying it's things like we don't have global warming, we have global boiling. And I sit there and I look and I think you just sound a bit ridiculous and a bit hysterical, so I zone out a little bit. But anyway, David.
Yeah, I mean, that's alarmism, isn't it? And these people are perfectly entitled to have their view, but there's a proper, legitimate way to protest that and to tell people what they think. And it's not going to someone's house. If they want to protest about it, there's two things they could do. They could go outside Parliament, in Parliament Square, which is a place which is well known that everyone can protest in without causing much disruption to everyday ordinary people and also respecting people's private property. And they can also put themselves forward.
Let me ask you this. A viewer, Stuart, has just been in touch. He says, go on, Greenpeace. I fully support their actions. He says, what's more troubling than the actions of Greenpeace is media outlets like you on GB News Now constantly criticising peaceful protests. So he's asking, if they're not allowed to do this, Stuart's asking, so how do you suggest that anyone protest then?
Yeah, well, they should put themselves forward for election, shouldn't they? If they want to do that, so if they actually want to change the law and they want to stop the oil and gas contracts and that they've got going on now, which I think is a good thing, actually. I don't agree with the climate alarmism that they're putting forward. If they want to do that, well, they should put them forward, join the Green Party or something and stand for election.
So you think no protest, and if you want to make a point, stand for election?
No, they can have a protest,
well,
but the protest should be done legitimately.
They
should be done legitimately in somewhere like Parliament Square, you know, where there's been a history of protests. That's the place you go and protest. So
to answer Stuart's question, because he's saying, how do you suggest, and your answer to that is, go to Parliament Square and protest there. But then that means that every other day, every other hour, every random's going to be protesting stuff in Parliament Square, so no one's going to pay any attention then, because it'll just be the same old day, same old cause, whatever. They won't get the attention. Yeah,
well, I mean, that's why they've done it. They've done this to get the attention, but it's wrong, because they shouldn't be impinging on someone's private property.
And if so many people, I'm waving my pen, I'm going to put my pen down, my mum would tell me off, that's bad manners. If so many people are so concerned, you're saying like loads of people concerned about this agenda, why do, for example, the Green Party get pretty much nowhere in things like elections if everyone is so passionate about the causes that you refer to?
Well, I don't think anyone would claim that this is necessarily a majority opinion yet in the public. And why Greenpeace are taking actions such as this is because they want to make more of the public aware of the extreme action which Rishi Sunak has taken. And I think this also comes with an analysis of the media, right? So you're saying if people want to change policy, they can go get elected. Now, we do have a long history of civil disobedience in this country as a way to get your voice heard. We also have, and I have a very strong critique of the fact that so much of our media in this country is owned by very rich, wealthy people, which means that unless you have billionaire backers, one of the only ways to try and shape the media agenda is to take extreme, controversial actions such as this. The only way to get in the headlines is to do something controversial. It's much easier to set the agenda if you have billionaire mates who will help you start a channel for £20 million. It's much harder if you are an environmental protester and the billionaire oil barons aren't so keen on your agenda.
Well, some of these groups, like Just Stop Oil, they have billionaire or millionaire backers. I mean, they're not short of a bob or two. But, you know, I would still say this is not an extreme opinion. This is a majority opinion that people do not want climate alarmism. We don't want net zero policies. We don't.
The majority of the public wants net zero.
No, I don't think so. I don't.
Well, the polling shows that.
I don't think so. I think that's what we're getting through some of the mainstream media channels and through the main political parties.
You think that the pollsters have just made it all up and actually people are against net zero?
You can't tell sometimes the polls, you know, they do surveys which get them the right results by asking the right questions. But I know a lot of people who want to carry on using their petrol and diesel cars. If you said to people, do you want petrol and diesel cars to be banned in 2030, which is what the Conservative Party is saying, the majority of people will say, no, I don't want to have to give up my petrol and diesel cars. If you ask people, would you want to give up your gas boilers and have a heat pump, they would say no. If you said, would you want more expensive electricity because we're going to get rid of all our coal, oil and gas and go to wind and solar, people would say no because they don't want more expensive electricity.
So you do.
So it depends on what question you ask people, what result you get in a poll.
So I think you hit on an important point there. What the polls generally say is people do back net zero. They are very concerned about climate change. They do want policies to try and stop it or to limit it. I think that's the only thing that's possible right now. What they do say is that they don't want to have to pay loads of money to do that, and I think that's very reasonable. I think that's why we have to, in this country, put higher taxes on the super wealthy so that the government can make sure that people don't have to spend extra of their income on an electric car, for example. We can do this with smart policy.
I always eye roll, I'm going to be honest. I just eye roll when I hear this kind of, oh, we need to tax the super wealthy, we need to tax the super... It just makes me eye roll a little bit because when you look at, in terms of income tax, the top 1%, I think they pay something like 28, 29% of all the income tax in this country. When you broaden it out to the top 10%, I think they pay something like, is it the top 60% or something of all income tax comes from the top 10%. So it's like the wealthy, they already pay a small fortune.
Well, so the big issue here is wealth, I think, as much as income. So you've got lots of people who are sitting on a lot of property, a lot of wealth. And have you met the super rich? I mean, I used to be a private tutor and I've been in some of these people's houses and we could definitely tax them a lot more than we currently do. So people got a lot richer over the COVID pandemic. People have got, or inequality has increased since the 1980s. So there are a lot of rich people with a lot of money which we could tax. Now, there are a lot of media organisations that want to distract from that. Often they are owned by billionaires, right? And why is it the case that billionaires want a bunch of media outlets that tell people it's impossible to tax the rich?
What I find interesting, I'm not part of the elite, 1% super wealthy and all the rest of it. And I've always, in fact, all my life, I think I've always said, irrespective of my finances, that I think actually taxing the rich, overtaxing the rich is ridiculous. And when you say people are concerned about net zero, I'm not surprised, quite frankly, because look at any weather forecast in this day and age, the shades of red that they use, I found it a little bit pathetic, quite frankly, because I dread to think what you're going to do once you've used all of your hysterical reds up. Where are you going to go? What colour are we going to have next? We're going to have black? Where are we going to go after all of this red has been used up?